Ukraine, the US, and the Europeans want peace, but we want a robust and long-standing peace. I think it's very good that the US proposed something to go to a ceasefire and peace, and we have to commend these efforts. But at the same time, as what is at stake is obviously Ukrainian sovereignty and European security, it's normal to have both the Ukrainians and the Europeans on the table to finalize this plan. So this is exactly what we will do tomorrow and the days after, in order to make a common plan. Now, we just have one problem, and our problem is not the US on this negotiation at this point. Our unique problem, all of us, is Russia, which started this war. We refused to take the ceasefire proposals in February, March, July, August, etc., and didn't provide any guidance if they are okay just to have a ceasefire now. And look at the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, not just in the east, but everywhere. Look at the situation of the infrastructure, of energy and so on. Look at the civilian casualties. I mean, this is a necessity to stop the Russians. There is one aggressor and one victim. Full stop.
The US can provide Ukraine with Tomahawks. Trump's team began another round of negotiations. Meanwhile, European allies have prepared another plan to end the war in Ukraine. What are the remaining results of US-led negotiations over Ukraine, and how could this influence the outcome of this war? US and Ukraine negotiators signaled progress Sunday after days of talks in Switzerland aimed at shaping a framework to end the war in Ukraine. Through major issues remain unresolved. In a joint statement, officials described the discussions as constructive and said the two countries had reached an updated and refined version of US-backed peace plan originally introduced by President Trump. The sides said they had aligned positions on several elements of the plan and identified clear next steps for negotiations in the coming days. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who led US delegation, called conversations productive, adding that both sides made real progress. Ukrainian negotiators, led by Andriy Yermak, President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, suggested that the revised draft now reflects most of Ukraine's priorities. Still, officials cautioned the work is far from finished. Negotiators remain divided over issues central to Ukraine's future security, including the size of its post-war military, the country's long-term relation with NATO, and the treatment of Russian-occupied territory. The Geneva meeting also revealed growing differences among Western partners. According to diplomats from Britain, France, and Germany, countries submitted a set of counter-proposals that push back against several provisions in US plan. European draft calls for a larger Ukrainian army, rejecting earlier US limits on Ukrainian army, NATO-style security guarantee, offering collective defense commitments, a territorial negotiation process based on the current lines of contact, rather than pre-designating areas as permanently under Russian control, a reconstruction plan that preserves frozen Russian assets until Moscow pays compensation, diverging from US proposed, and US also resisted efforts to broaden participation in talks, with American officials seeking to limit the negotiations between Ukraine and US. Ukraine, however, has coordinated with European partners behind the scenes and publicly welcomed the new plan. The Geneva discussions take place at politically delicate moment from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who faced domestic backlash over any perceived concessions. Some elements of Trump's plan, including territorial compromises, troop caps, and restrictions on NATO membership, sparked criticism in Ukraine and are non-starter for Ukrainian government. Zelensky has emphasized that any peace framework must protect Ukraine's sovereignty and cannot legitimize Russian territorial claims. Both sides say negotiations will continue and that final decisions will be made directly by President Zelensky and Trump. Timing of potential leaders' meeting remains unclear. European officials say more revisions are likely before the framework can be presented to Russia or to global partners whose support will be crucial. For now, the Geneva outcome stopped short of breakthrough, but marks the most substantial movement in months toward a possible negotiating end to the war. Meanwhile, Trump's administration push to advance a new peace proposal for Ukraine has placed Volodymyr Zelensky under extraordinary pressure as he confronts what the Washington Post describes perhaps the most agonizing choice of his presidency. According to reporting by Washington Post, U.S. envoys traveled to Geneva this week to present this new plan drafted under President Donald Trump and now active review by his team. American officials told newspapers that the proposal is aspirational and open to negotiation. Citing U.S. officials and sources, Post reports that proposal includes several far-reaching concessions, a cap on the size of Ukrainian military, limiting long-term defense capability, Ukrainian withdrawal from 25% of Donetsk, and other establishment of a demilitarized zone between Russia, Ukrainian troops, and U.S.-supported technology security wall to be established there. These terms reflect Washington's belief that Ukraine needs a viable path to end the war, but they also risk provoking domestic backlash inside Ukraine because this would be a non-starter for Ukraine. American officials told Washington Post that current draft security guarantees may not be sufficient to deter future Russian aggression. As a result, the administration is reportedly waiting whether to provide Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles if a deal is reached, a move intended to offset the impact of territorial concessions. Officials told the Post they do not believe Kyiv would use these weapons preemptively, noting that doing so would jeopardize its ties with U.S. Washington Post stressed that the timing of peace efforts deepens the strain on Zelensky. With battlefield setbacks in Donetsk and corruption scandal, Ukrainian president faces pressure from both the public and political rivals. To address Ukraine's internal instability, U.S. draft reportedly includes also national election 100 days after ceasefire deal, a post-war amnesty for Ukrainian officials, an effort, the Post says, to ease concerns with Zelensky's embattled administration. According to the Washington Post, Zelensky now faces a stark decision: accept the deal, risking public outrage, and charges the surrendering of Ukrainian sovereignty, or reject it, condemning the nation to a prolonged war with uncertain end and risking erosion of U.S. support. Meanwhile, Congress pushed back against Ukrainian peace plan as lawmakers demand transparency and security guarantees. Democrats and Republicans joined criticism. Senator Jeannie Shaheen of New Hampshire called draft a surrender deal. Other prominent voices, including Senator Roger Wicker, the top Republican on the Armed Services Committee, argued that any cap on Ukraine military would intrude on a country's sovereign right to defend itself. According to those lawmakers, Secretary of State Marco Rubio describes the plan as essential is the Russians' wish list. Rubio's State Department strongly denied the characterization, insisting the proposal is American-authored and incorporates Ukrainian-Russian viewpoints. The dispute has only sharpened congressional skepticism about the administration's messaging. Senior lawmakers are now pushing to ensure Congress has a formal role in shaping or blocking any final agreement. Senator Lindsey Graham said any deal involving U.S. security guarantee must go through Congress, calling for a full review of the negotiations and warning that weak guarantees would invite future conflict. On the House side, Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul said he would not advise Ukraine to sign any deal unless security commitments are ironclad. Without that, he warned, Ukraine could be left vulnerable to a second invasion. Some lawmakers argue the draft plan risks undermining decades of U.S. deterrence. Critics warn that territorial concessions could embolden Russia and signal to other hostile nations that the U.S. is willing to pressure allies. Several congressional voices have also pushed for expanding sanctions against Russia, a sign that parts of Congress are willing to move independently of the administration if they feel peace process tilts too far toward Moscow. Growing chorus of criticism points to a broader political challenge for the administration, and agreement reached with Kyiv will require long-term American backing, and lawmakers are signaling they are not prepared to rubber stamp a plan they consider too pro-Russian or too secretive in its development. That's all for today. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, and glory to Ukraine.